Okay, I just want to say, I know my makeup looks awful, I know my hair is all frizzy, I know my bookshelves are a total mess, but what you have to understand is that I have been putting off filming this video since May, so I just can't procrastinate doing it any longer. If I don't do it now, it won't get done ever. Okay, so I read a grand total of 24 books in the months of April, May, June, July, and August of 2025. And so I probably won't go into a ton of detail regarding every single one of them, but here's a brief overview of all the books I read between April and August of this year. There were definitely some months where I didn't do a ton of reading, especially in like the spring and early summer. But I did listen to a lot of good music, so I mean, that counts for something. The Kinks, the Divinyls, the Go-Go's, the Byrds, the Dead Kennedys. So I had a pretty good summer overall. The first book I read in April was Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller. This is a play, and I read it for school, so it's not like one of my new favorites or anything, but I did really enjoy it. I don't remember a ton about it. I remember that there's a salesman, and spoiler alert, he dies. But I remember that it like sort of plays with timelines, and it really focuses on his relationship with his family, and I thought it was pretty good, solid read. The next book I read was Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, one of my favorites back in middle school, and it follows the story of one of my favorite characters, Haymitch, during his games when he was a teenager. I went into this pretty skeptically because back when I started reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the other Hunger Games prequel, I was pretty disappointed by it, but I was actually super pleasantly surprised by Sunrise on the Reaping. It was just as engaging and enthralling and fun as all the original books, and I would definitely place it on par with the original trilogy. Or I liked it better than Mockingjay, at least. Originally, I wasn't totally sold on the idea of getting a whole book about Haymitch's Hunger Games because we already got to see a good chunk of it in Catching Fire. But there is so much in this book that we didn't already get to see or know about in Catching Fire, and I feel like it just made the character and the world feel so much richer. What I'm trying to say is that it doesn't feel superfluous. It doesn't feel like a cash grab. It feels like a passion project. As much as I love this book, I definitely noticed that the writing style, or just like little things here and there, felt kind of juvenile to me. At times I felt myself asking like, was this written for like 12-year-olds? Only to remember that yes, in fact, it was written for 12-year-olds, and the only reason I didn't feel that way reading the other 3 books was because I was like 13 when I read them, so makes sense. Well, I think it was 10 when I read the first one actually, but irrelevant. And on top of that, my biggest gripe with this book would have to be just the sheer amount of characters from the original trilogy making cameos in this one. Like, I'm sorry, it just felt a little bit cheap to me. Like, there's no way the world is that small. That said, it's super entertaining, compelling. It made me bawl like a baby, which I did not expect. I remember judging everybody like online for saying that they cried so much during this book. I was like, I would never cry at like a children's book. That's so lame. Bawled like a baby. Also, I don't know why I even thought that because I 1000% cried at children's books before. I think The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane has made me cry more times than I can count. But whatever. Also, this isn't totally relevant, and it's also kind of a spoiler, I think. So just making you aware of that. But I was really kind of confused to see that in the upcoming movie, the characters of Luella and Lulu are cast to be portrayed by 2 different actresses. I thought that was such an odd choice because from what I interpreted, maybe I'm just dumb, I assumed that like the Capitol had given Lulu like cosmetic surgery to make her physically resemble Luella as much as possible, like almost identically. So as much faith as I have in the casting directors of that film, that decision felt a little questionable to me. The next book I read was Witch Hat Atelier Volume 1 by Kamome Shirahama. I'm really sorry if I'm saying that wrong, I probably am. This is the first book in a manga series about a little witch who becomes a witch's apprentice. It's really cute. I'm not a huge manga reader, but you know, I dabble here and there, and I'm definitely open to reading more manga. You know, I'm always looking to broaden my horizons when it comes to what types of books I read. I thought that the story and all of the characters were really cute and charming and wholesome. And also the magic system that was used sort of reminded me, with pen and paper, it sort of reminded me of the magic used in the Owl House, which is this Disney cartoon I used to watch in junior high. I remember loving that show. I never finished it though. Anyway, and I know I speak way too quickly, so I am making it a goal of mine to slow down. So if you hear me trying to intentionally speak more slowly throughout the video, you should be thanking me, honestly, because people always like to complain that I talk too fast. The next book I read was another graphic novel, The Phantom Twin by Lisa Brown. This follows conjoined twins named Isabel and Jane, who join a circus back in, I want to say it takes place in like the 30s? Something like that. Back olden days, old-timey, you know. I really like this book. I really love the artwork, and I like the story as well. The next book I read was A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. This is another play, and again, I read it for a class. As I'm sure many of you already know, this play follows the relationship between three characters. We have our two sisters, Stella and Blanche, and then Stella's husband, Stanley, and sort of the dynamic that the three of them have. And it's set in Louisiana in the 1940s, so that's fun. I'm not gonna lie to you, I had to write on this book so much that I'm a little tired of talking about it, but I did like it. I think it was a good play that explored some interesting themes. The next book I read was Bluebeard by Kurt Vonnegut. This is sort of a fictional memoir about the life of this artist named Rabo. So it takes place, it's like dual timeline, it takes place back and forth between Rabo's youth as an artist's apprentice and during his like old age. I think he's already retired. And it explores his relationship with this writer named C.C. Bergman, who, if I remember correctly, is the person who encouraged him to write his autobiography to begin with. Of course, it's named after the classic fairy tale of the same name, which, fun fact, was actually my favorite fairy tale when I was a little girl. It surprises me, too, that I didn't grow up to become a serial killer. I guess I've always loved morbid stories like that. I mean, it makes sense that I'm a horror fan now. Anyway, if you know the fairy tale, you know that Bluebeard forbids his wife from going into the cellar of their house. And sort of parallel to that, in this book, Rabo forbids anybody from going into the shed in his backyard. So it's sort of like this lurking mystery all throughout the book, like what's in the shed, like what's the shed about, you know, we don't know what it contains until the very end. So it's got that like sort of element of mystery as well. The first book I read in May was Weather by Jenny Offel, or Offil, I don't know how to say it. This is a literary fiction novel following a woman named Lizzie, who is worrying about a lot of stuff. She's worried about like the political and economic state of the world right now. Most of her concerns are in regards to like climate change, environmentalism, society, and the political landscape of the 21st century. This book wasn't boring per se, but it felt a little bland. I could tell that the author was really passionate about the subjects about which she was writing, but the execution just fell a little flat for me, and it left the book as a whole feeling a little bit forgettable and uninspired. It wasn't a bad book by any means. In my opinion, it was perfectly adequate, perfectly fine. It just didn't really stand out to me. Next, I read the second volume of Witch Hat Atelier, which I thought was adorable as well. I really look forward to continuing on with this series. The next book I read was Enough Rope by Dorothy Parker. Obsessed. Absolutely obsessed. She's like one of my new favorite poets of all time now. Love this book to death. It's a book of poems, obviously. They're all so witty and clever and funny and smart, and I feel like I just said a bunch of words that mean the same thing, but I don't even care. I adore just like, words cannot express how much I love Dorothy Parker. Since reading this, I have read a handful of other poems that weren't in this book, and I want to read everything the woman's ever written. I love, 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 love. If you like poetry that's clever, comedic, and lyrical, Dorothy Parker, man, Dorothy Parker. Also, this is not entirely relevant, but I just wanted to take a quick moment to brag and show off this other book of Dorothy Parker poetry that I got. I think the cover is so pretty. And of course, I've read a handful of the poems in here. I love it so much. The next book I read was Night Animals by Brett Evans. I'm not totally sure if I should even count this because it doesn't contain any words, it's just illustrations. But you know what, it's my list, so I get to do what I want. It contained 2 separate narratives, both of which were weird and absurd and avant-garde, essentially all the things I love. Every single page is so densely and deftly illustrated that I wanted to just stare at each of them for hours, just to make sure I didn't miss out on a single detail. It was sort of like Where's Waldo, but with more nudity. The first book I read in June was Beautiful World, Where Are You? By Sally Rooney. I read Sally Rooney's novel Normal People, I want to say last year, and I really enjoyed it. So I was looking forward to reading more of her work, but this book was for sure a disappointment for me. This follows 2 friends, they're both writers, named Eileen and Alice, and their respective love interests, named Simon and Felix. I didn't really care for any of the characters. I thought they were all kind of dislikable and dull, but Felix especially, hate him, despise him, detest him. Wish he were dead? Yeah. Don't like that man, no. And a lot of the time, I really enjoy unlikable characters and unlikable protagonists. I think that they can be really interesting to follow a lot of the time, but unfortunately, I didn't find that to be the case for this book. I just thought they were really boring. The first half of the book, specifically, felt profoundly soporific. I thoroughly debated just straight up giving up and putting it down and not picking it back up, but I did end up finishing the whole thing. I think for me it picked up after the second half, but I still wasn't totally enthralled. And also all the emails that the characters send to one another throughout the novel just sort of felt to me like a bunch of essays that Sally Rooney wanted to write, but she crammed them into this fiction novel for some reason. I wasn't crazy about any of them, but then again, I wasn't crazy about any of the chapters that didn't involve emails either, so I guess I'm just a hater. I know my feelings toward this book are generally on the negative side. I didn't dislike it, but I definitely didn't love it. That said, I do still really want to read a lot of Sally Rooney's other work, especially Intermezzo, which is on my shelf back there, and I'd like to read Conversations with Friends someday as well. So I'm not, giving up hope on Sally Rooney, because I did really enjoy Normal People, but Beautiful World, Where Are You was just not my cup of tea, and that's okay. The next book I read was The Basic Eight by Danielle Handler. This was a reread for me. The first time I read this was, I think, summer of last year. This follows a high school senior named Flannery Culp, who is recounting to us from prison her very chaotic senior year of high school. And of course, the reason she's in prison is because she has been arrested for taking the life of one of her classmates. So we get to sort of follow the story leading up to that event. I love me a good old-fashioned whodunit mystery, but what I really love is a whydunit/howdunit mystery, where we know right off the bat that, like, character A kills character B, or something to that effect, and we spend the book following character A on their journey to that point. You'll see later on this list that I read a couple more books that fall into that category later on this year, and I really enjoy it as, like, a trope. Anyway, I was in sort of a reading slump, probably thanks to the dullness that was Beautiful World, Where Are You? But, so I wanted to pick up a book that I knew I would really enjoy and be able to, like, fly through and just have fun with. And, of course, I knew that this book would suffice. It's not perfect by any means, but it's right up my alley, especially, like, humor-wise. And I was so surprised to find that there were so many references throughout this, be it to, like, pop culture, literature, or just, like, stuff in general, that completely went over my head the first time I read it. And it just made me realize how much I learned in a year. Like, I really didn't think that I had changed that much in just 12 months. But, like, reading this, I was like, oh, I didn't catch that last time. I didn't even know who that was last time. I didn't know what that was last time. Like, it makes references to Dorothy Parker and Moliere and Nabokov and all these things that I was none the wiser to the first time I read it. But on my second read, it felt so special to be able to pick up on things that I didn't pick up on the first time. And I'm really grateful for the fact that I was able to learn so much in just 1 year and be able to actually see that reflected in something. Does that make sense? I feel like I just said a ton of words that didn't really mean anything. What I'm trying to say is that I think it's really cool to be able to pick up on things that you wouldn't have picked up on a year ago, and it just goes to show how much you learn in that amount of time. In addition to that, since this was my second read through, I of course knew, like, all the plot twists and all the reveals and whatnot, so I was able to pick up on a ton of foreshadowing that I was none the wiser to the first time. And in hindsight, I'm like, was I stupid for not picking up on all of this foreshadowing? Because hindsight being 2020, it did seem pretty obvious, but it's definitely, if you really love this book in the first read, I would definitely say it's worth a reread. It was for me, at least. If you're an English student who hates other English students, I would say this is the book for you. Flannery is a wonderfully hateable protagonist. The next book I read was The Secret History by Donna Tartt, and I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm just going to come out and say that this was my favorite book I read all year. I adored it so much. This follows college student Richard Papin as he joined this group of elite students at his school who study Greek and make questionable life choices. My expectations going in were set pretty high, just because I know everyone and their mother raves about what a masterpiece this book is. But then again, I've heard people say, like, the same thing about books I thought were mediocre. So, like, I went in a little skeptically as well. I was, of course, hoping that I would enjoy it, but I was a little hesitant. I was worried that, like, maybe it would be overhyped. But I'm here to say that, in my humble opinion, it's not overhyped at all. It's one of the best books I've ever read. I loved everything about it. The writing was so rich and lush, and the story is so thrilling and addictive. It could be a little bit dense, but never dull for a moment, and never difficult to follow. It rode on that perfect line of being, like, intellectually stimulating, but still incredibly fun. It really made me feel like I was a part of the story, like I was right there alongside Richard, integrated into this social group, like, every step of the way. And I know I haven't said a ton about the plot, but that's because it really is one of those books where it's better to go in blind and be surprised, at least in my opinion. That's what I did, and I think I really benefited from that experience, just reading it knowing virtually nothing. So yeah, The Secret History, my favorite book I've read so far. Chef's kiss, adore it. Perfect, perfect. Well, no book is without its flaws, but this one's pretty close. The next book I read was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This follows a magician named Kel who has the ability to travel between 3 alternate versions of London. There's Red London, Grey London, and White London, and they all have varying levels of magic. And Red London is where Kel is from, and it's like there's magic there and everything is peachy. White London has magic and everything there is not so peachy. And then Grey London is pretty much our world. There's magic has been completely forgotten and virtually nobody uses it or even knows it exists. And I won't spoil anything, of course, but Kel winds up getting himself into a good deal of trouble, and he winds up teaming up with our other protagonist, who is a thief named Lila, and she's from Grey London. So we get to see that dynamic of sort of our 2 main characters having the same end goal but for different reasons, which is one of my favorite tropes in fiction. I feel like it makes for such a good and compelling dynamic. I really love the dynamic between the 2 main characters in general. I feel like they bounced off one another really well. I also really like the magic system and the world created in this book. I really appreciated the whimsicality and almost simplicity of this book. It definitely gets, spoiler alert, it definitely gets more complex and big and action-packed and complicated in later installments in the series. But I really like just how simplistic the first book is and how straightforward. I guess I'm just a simpleton, maybe. The next book I read was A Gathering of Shadows, which is book 2 in the Shades of Magic series. This was definitely a tonal shift from book 1, and not necessarily for the better, in my opinion. It sort of felt a little disjointed. I thought the story was really entertaining. This book introduced us to some new characters and new lore, which of course I always appreciate. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, it felt a tiny bit unnecessary. I feel like I spent most of it just waiting for something better to happen, and then it just never did. Also, our 2 main characters spend 99% of this book separated, and their dynamic was one of my favorite parts of book 1, so seeing that lost in this one left me a little bit disappointed. I feel like Kel and Lila match each other's level of annoyingness. They're both really annoying. To clarify, I personally am not annoyed by them, but I can acknowledge that they are objectively annoying individuals. Takes one to know one, and I feel they're a good match in that way, because they're both annoying. But I wasn't annoyed by them. I love them. They're my 2 favorite characters, and yeah, I don't know what that says about me. The next book I read was Forever by Judy Blume. This follows a senior in high school named Catherine. We get to see her relationship with her friends, her family, and most importantly to the novel is her relationship with her boyfriend Michael. Apparently it was recently adapted into a TV series, which I wasn't aware of when I picked it up. I just wanted something really short and quick and easy to get through. I didn't love this book. I feel like I probably wasn't the target audience. But there's something about Judy Blume's books that always just feels so comforting and cozy. They make me feel like I was a teenager in the 1970s, and it's almost a nostalgic feeling. I really enjoy that. I like to think of Forever as the edgy older sister to Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret. They have similar tones and similar character arcs, I guess, almost. But Forever is definitely a lot more mature in its subject matter, and it swears a lot more. That said, I did feel like Catherine felt a little bit younger than 17, 18 to me. Just her voice and her narration and everything, it almost felt like she was more closer to 14, 15. But that's just, I don't know. I'm just being judgmental right now. Speaking of judgment, Catherine's boyfriend Michael, don't like him. Yeah, I'm glad I read this book because I know it was super controversial back in the day. It's one of the most widely banned books of all time, yada yada yada. So I'm glad I read it for that purpose, and I'm also glad I didn't read it as a grown adult, because I feel like that would have been even more awkward. But yeah, it was fine, perfectly fine. The next book I read was A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab. This is the 3rd book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. I'm really sorry for speaking so quickly. I feel like you think I'm on crack. I promise I'm not. I think you promise. I actually don't have too much to say about this book, other than that I liked it more than book 2, but not as much as book 1. I think it was a pretty solid finale to the trilogy. I had a really fun time reading it. The next book I read was Time's Arrow by Martin Amis. This was the first Martin Amis book I'd ever read, and I remember I first heard of him because I was browsing a bookstore one day, and I came across a book titled Dead Babies, and with a title like that, of course it's gonna catch my eye, but I eventually talked myself down from buying it because I was like, hey, girl, you can't just buy a book because you think the title is weird. But I ended up buying this one, of course. It follows a really interesting premise, very unique. Essentially, it follows this like amorphous soul slash like conscious parasite that is attached to this guy called Todd, and our narrator can see through Todd's eyes and hear through his ears, but he can't understand what's going on inside Todd's head. He's just sort of like a silent follower throughout Todd's life. But the shtick of it all is that our narrator experiences the world or Todd's life in reverse chronological order. So the book starts with Todd dying and it ends with him being born. So that was a really interesting premise. The narrator's interpretation of the world brings with it a lot of dramatic irony and dark comedy, because he doesn't totally understand like how the world works and how time works, or like how human beings experience time. So like, because you know he lived life backwards. So like, for example, there's one scene where he talks about how Todd will like go up to little children in the street and steal candy from them and give it to the store in exchange for money. And of course, we as the reader understand that, you know, Todd is buying candy to give to children on the street, so it's like this very sweet thing that this old man is doing. But of course, because the narrator isn't aware of that, he interprets it as like Todd is just like being a jerk and stealing candy from kids. And a lot of the humor derives from situations like that, like dramatic irony. I'm not gonna lie, around like maybe the 30-page mark or so, I was like, okay, I get the gist, like I understand, this could be a short story. Like I feel like it was a little unnecessary to stretch into 150 pages. I think it would have I think the impact would have been the same had it been a lot shorter, but that's just me being a brat, honestly. It wasn't that long, and it wasn't like a slog to get through. I just felt like it didn't really need to be as long as it was. Time's Arrow is probably most well known for being like a Holocaust novel depicting World War II, because at one point Todd does, you know, join the army during World War II, and the Holocaust happens. So it's really interesting to see it from the narrator's perspective of like happening in reverse, you know. It's so dark and bleak, yet fascinating to see the events of, you know, one of the most horrible things in history happen through the narration of this blissfully ignorant being. I think the part following World War II was definitely the most interesting and thought-provoking part of the novel. The parts following it and the parts preceding it were just kind of there. Oh, that sounds so mean. I don't mean it like that. I really enjoyed this book. I just feel like that little portion was by far the most interesting. So yeah, I'll probably be reading more from Martin Amis in the future because I think he's a clever guy and he's got some really good jokes. That's Time's Arrow. The next book I read was These Violet Delights by Mika Never Ever. This is the third Y. Dennett mystery I read over the past couple months. It takes place in the 70s and it follows these college students named Paul and Julian and the friendship that they form, which quickly becomes very obsessive and almost symbiotic and deeply, deeply unhealthy. It really is a story about infatuation and fascination and obsession and toxic relationships. So if that's something interesting to you, I strongly recommend it. It also has this very like prestigious academic setting because they're both these very like bright science students at university. I thought the relationship between the two characters was developed so well. It was so fascinating to read about. The story was such a page turner. My only gripe with this book, and it's so insanely petty, is that there were a couple of words that I just felt like they were overused. For example, the word sidle was used 15 times, the word idol is used 16 times, and the word Elysian is used 3 times, which I know that complete is very petty, but it definitely stuck out to me. Like every time the word sidle was used, I was like, come on, like Mika, babe, pick another word. Like the next book I read was Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. This is a contemporary fiction novel that follows a recovered addict named Cyrus and his obsession with martyrdom. I really liked it overall. It was funny, accessible, and interesting. I think that the first handful of chapters were probably my favorites. There are some interesting stylistic choices in this book, like dreams and poems are sprinkled throughout, which adds this really nice layer of texture to the story. It almost feels like a mixed media project. My only big complaint would be that I feel like the main message almost felt a little too mushy for me. I'm all for hope and joy and all that stuff, but this book's optimism just like almost reached a saccharine level, I feel like, which I would have preferred something a little more bittersweet. But maybe I'm just overly cynical. That's probably it, honestly. The next book I read was The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. This is the first book in a sequel trilogy to the Shades of Magic trilogy. I know everyone says that you can jump right on into Threads of Power without reading Shades of Magic. And like, yeah, you can do that. You can also jump off a cliff. That doesn't mean you should. I personally would strongly recommend reading the Shades of Magic trilogy first and then reading Threads of Power, because it'll make a lot more sense that way. If you did the inverse, it would, I personally would be a little bit confused, and I feel like I wouldn't really get the full experience of either story. Anyway, this book follows our original crew from Shades of Magic, with a handful of additional main characters thrown in there. One of them is a girl named Tess. I thought she was endearing, and she brought some original things to the table. The other main character is named Kosika, or Kosika, I don't know which, my bad. I wasn't quite as invested in her subplot, but I do really look forward to seeing how her story moves forward in future books, because a lot of setup was clearly done, and I'm excited to see how that will pay off. That said, my favorite parts of the book were definitely the chapters when we got to follow our original crew from Shades of Magic. It takes place 7 years after the original trilogy, but I'm not gonna lie, none of the characters really feel 7 years older or more mature to me. They kind of just feel the same, but you know, oh well. The story itself, though, was really fun. I would place this as my second favorite book in that universe after A Darker Shade of Magic. I think my rating would go A Darker Shade of Magic, or my ranking, words. A Darker Shade of Magic is number 1, then The Fragile Threads of Power as number 2, and then I'd put A Conjuring of Light as number 3, and A Gathering of Shadows as number 4. So I really, really loved A Conjuring of Light. Nope, wrong book. I really loved The Fragile Threads of Power, and I feel like it lacked a lot of the issues that I had with books 2 and 3 of the original trilogy, so I really appreciated that. It was always interesting, and it was so, like, the story felt so grand, but never too big, if that makes sense. I feel like I've been filming for so long that I'm just yapping at this point. Like, none of what I'm saying is, like, logical sentences. It's all just, like, gobbledygook. But, and also my voice is getting really sore, so sorry about that. The next book I read, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce, but it's Fantastes, or Fantastes, but it's by George MacDonald, and I really love this book. It very much takes inspiration from classic fairy tales. It's a fantasy novel written in, like, the 1800s, so it's, like, pre-Tolkien, like, a lot of the fantasy tropes that we have nowadays. So it really does feel like a fairy tale, and I love fairy tales. It's such a magical, whimsical story, following this young man's adventure through fairyland. It's almost episodic, and I really love all the characters that we get introduced to, and the writing is so beautiful, and all the poems throughout were just so lovely, and I really adored this book. I can't wait to read more from George MacDonald, because I feel like this book just had everything I love. Like, it felt so perfectly in line with my personal tastes. The next book I read was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This follows 2 pre-med students named Victor and Eli, who essentially discover the secret to creating supernatural abilities. Also in this book, they call people with extraordinary abilities EOs, which I thought was really funny because it just made me think of the lip balm. It's a dual timeline book, so we jump back and forth between their senior year of college, when Victor and Eli are best friends, and 10 years later, when they're arch nemeses. And it really explores their relationship and their concepts of heroism and villainy. I'm usually not the biggest fan of multi-timeline stories, but I think Schwab did a really good job at navigating it. She manages to jump all over the timeline in a way that's both intriguing and easy to follow. This was such a fun book. It's super, super addictive, and it's also filled with so many interesting ideas in regards to morality and the supernatural and all this fun stuff. I also really enjoyed the characters, not to spoil anything, but I thought we had a really fun like found family dynamic, and then I also thought there was a really fun sort of Bonnie and Clyde dynamic. It's not a conventional superhero story, but it definitely toys with the tropes of superhero stories in a way that's really fresh and just so much fun. This book is just so much fun. It really was. And also I love the little like superhero mask things all throughout. I thought they were really kitschy and cute. It was so deliciously thrilling and addictive. I remember after finishing this, I binge watched like every single interview with V.E. Schwab on the entire internet. I probably spent like hours of my life just watching interviews with her. I feel like she's just so interesting. I could listen to her talk forever. I love the way she speaks about writing and how passionate she is about what she does. And obviously, I can't wait to read more books from her in the future because she's got like a bazillion out, and I'm sure she's got a bazillion yet to come. The last book I read in August was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This, of course, follows Victor Frankenstein as he makes this creature monster type thing, grants it life, and is subsequently horrified by it and rejects it. And it's a really surprisingly introspective novel, considering, you know, all the spectacle and campy horror that is associated with it. But I really love the writing and the gothic aesthetic, the almost philosophical discussions that are sparked in this book. It's such a good classic. It's also not that hard to read whatsoever, so if you're looking to get into classics, I'd say this is a really good pick. And it's pretty short as well, relatively. I really love this book. It was so gorgeous. And I've literally been procrastinating reading it for like the past 6 or 7 years. So I'm really happy that I finally got around to doing so. It was more than worth it. Alright, that was every book I read in April, May, June, July, and August of 2025. Again, I'm really sorry for speaking so quickly. That's just like my natural pace. I'm trying to tone it down. I hope to make the effort someday to speak more slowly and more euphoniously, but that day is not today, clearly. I promise I'm sober. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and yeah, bye-bye. You know what's funny to me? In the Patty Duke show, this is so niche, but in the Patty Duke show, all the like teenage characters bid farewell to people by saying the phrase long adioso, you know, like a mix of so long and adios. And I assumed initially that this was just like slang from like the 50s, 60s, but I looked it up and like I couldn't find anything on the term long adioso. So I'm like, did the Patty Duke show just coin this phrase, this iconic phrase? Like, I want to start saying long adioso to people. Maybe that's how I'll sign off my videos from now on. I'll just be like, long adioso. Also, yes, I watched the Patty Duke show, okay? I love Patty Duke, leave me alone. I started watching Valley of the Dolls recently for the first time. I haven't finished it yet because I suck at finishing movies, but that's what I plan on doing after I finish filming this video, so we'll see what I have to say about that. Why am I still talking? I need to shut up. Okay, long adioso.